With the final shape well underway and the discovery of the new exotic class items, the community has been hard at work pushing the boundaries of Prismatic to see what each class is fully capable of. As many of you know, I've been a hunter main since the beginning of Destiny 1, and I've been loving the combat loop that Prismatic has opened up. What if I told you though that Prismatic has upped the game for warlocks to the point that I'm actually willing to tolerate that silly jump for a while and put my hunter to the side for the first time in a very long time? Just kidding. The warlock kits that we'll be exploring have the perfect combination of fun, satisfying combat, high damage output, and some true endgame potential. These builds will also recommend exotic armor pieces over their class item counterparts to make them as accessible as possible, given that the exotic class items have 64 possible combinations per class. That's a heck of a lot of RNG to battle through to get the perfect combo. But when having a specific class item is worth the grind, we'll point that out too. Some of the fragments that are included in these builds are unlocked through side quests or in other areas available only after you complete the campaign, so make sure you get to unlocking them as soon as possible to really maximize all that Prismatic has to offer. To start things off, we have the favorite part of the power fantasy for most Destiny players, damage output. I'll be separating this into two categories, that being burst or single target damage and extended or multi-target damage. The exotic that ties both of these categories together is the refreshed Apotheo's Veil. You might have forgotten about this exotic, and to be fair, I kinda did as well for a while because until Season of the Wish, this was a pretty underperforming piece of armor that was rarely worth the exotic slot. Even after its rework, which added the benefit of greatly increasing ability regeneration after casting your super, there just didn't seem to be that much of a reason to use it outside of speedrunning or very coordinated team efforts. Larger targets were typically too far away from your Well of Radiance to capitalize on the ability regeneration, and other burst damage supers like Nova Bomb and Needlestorm utilized other exotics to maximize the neutral game of their respective subclasses. But now we have Prismatic. This allows warlocks to have access to 3 high damage output supers in the form of Nova Bomb, or Slova Bomb as it's more commonly referred to, Needlestorm, and Song of Flame, all of which can take full advantage of Apotheo's Veil's ability regeneration after the super. Let's start out with our aspects because these are going to be the same regardless of the fight duration. We have Feed the Void and the newly added Hellion. Feed the Void will allow you to proc Devour whenever you defeat a target with any ability, and then can be continued with any kill to maintain it once it's activated. This will provide you with near constant grenade uptime and health regeneration so long as there's enemies nearby to kill. Hellion will give you a little solar buddy upon class activation that will lob little solar mortars at enemies and will ignite them after 4 consecutive hits. This really ups your damage output. The best class ability I found to pair with this aspect is Phoenix Dive, as it regenerates much more quickly than either of the rifts. It can be used for movement to get you out of bad situations, and it also gives you and your allies a quick burst of health. As always, your jump is completely up to you, although I find myself using Burst Glide more often than not for that extra momentum boost. Melees and grenades are usually up to your preference, however I do make sure to run 1 light and 1 darkness based ability to ensure that my prismatic bar is filling up as consistently as possible. That being said, I do find myself drawn towards Arcane Needles and the Vortex Grenade the most often because it seems to synergize a bit better than the other possible combinations, mostly because of the fragments we're about to look at. Facet of Courage allows your light-based abilities to deal increased damage to targets afflicted with darkness debuffs, which includes the unraveling that you'll apply with your Arcane Needles. This means that both your Vortex Grenade and your Nova Bomb will deal increased damage to a target as long as you hit them with the melee first. Feeding into this chain is Facet of Dominance, which allows your Void Grenades to weaken and your Arc Grenades to jolt. These are the 2 essential fragments to maximize your damage output, and the remaining 3 fragments are really up to your personal preference. I like using Facet of Purpose to give me free buffs on Orb Pickup, Facet of Protection for extra damage resistance, and Facet of Dawn to become Radiant anytime I land a powered melee hit. There are 4 mods in the artifact this season that really push this build even further. Starting off, we have Void Hegemony, which grants a small amount of overshield whenever you defeat a weakened target. Next, we have Radiant Orbs, which grants you the Radiant buff on Orb Pickup as long as you have a Solar or Prismatic subclass equipped. This will feed into our next artifact mod, Shield Crush, which will grant you bonus grenade regeneration and damage while Radiant or Amplified. And last but certainly not least, we have Expanding Abyss, which allows you to deal increased void damage to weakened sources. Starting with the helmet for armor mods, I would highly recommend a Siphon mod that matches your weapons to ensure that you're making orbs for yourself on weapon kills. On your arms, I would equip Impact Induction and a Momentum Transfer to accelerate your melee and grenade regeneration. Your leg mod should have surges that match your weapon's damage type if you're in a damage phase, or if you just want your weapons to be even more lethal. For the neutral game, I would recommend Recuperation for health gain, Innervation for grenade regeneration, and Invigoration for melee regeneration whenever you pick up an orb. If you want to have a larger emphasis on your weapons over your abilities, you can run double special weapons and some ammo scavenger mods in place of any of the ability regeneration mods. Moving down to the class item, this one again is more personal preference. I found that some combination of Reaper, Bomber, and Powerful Attraction kept the synergy between abilities moving really smooth. Your weapons are some of the game's most personal decisions, and that remains true with this build. Personally though, I would recommend trying out some weapons that have either Pugilist to help with melee regeneration or Demolitionist to help with grenade regeneration. And if you have Demolitionist, it will also help you reload instantaneously just by throwing a grenade. Okay, you can probably see where the gameplay loop is headed, and that is the utter destruction anytime you cast a Nova Bomb. Upon picking up a single orb before you start your damage phase, as well as using Phoenix Dive, you will activate Shield Crush, gain a Void Overshield and become Radiant, and get a Solar Buddy. Then throwing a single melee as well as your now boosted up grenade will simultaneously weaken, unravel, and scorch the target. Once the target is debuffed, your grenade will begin to do even more damage and continue to provide the weaken needed to proc Expanding Abyss, which will allow your Nova Bomb to do huge amounts of burst damage. And once you cast that super, you'll gain immediate health and ability regeneration for you and your allies from Apotheosis Veil's first benefit. The secondary benefit of the helmet will then provide you with 8 seconds of ability regeneration that is so fast that it's only slowed down by the animations of using the abilities themselves. This will let you spam those weapons with Demolitionist while continually reprocking Radiant, Weaken, Unravel, and Shield Crush. I mentioned at the beginning of this section that there's 2 categories of damage output, single target or burst and multi-target or extended. Taking advantage of the Nova Bomb will land you squarely in the single target or burst category, so let's switch over to the extended damage mode. The foundation of this build remains exactly the same, with the exchange of just a couple of different things. Firstly, we're going to be replacing one of the previously mentioned fragments such as Facet of Dawn with Facet of Ruin, which now increases the area of effect of your solar ignitions. Secondly, we'll be replacing the Nova Bomb with Song of Flame. This is the new solar super that Bungie gave Warlocks with the release of Final Shape. It will provide you with Radiance, a supercharged Incinerator Snap, a new Seeking Grenade called a Wisp, improved ability regeneration, and increased damage resistance. This increase in ability regeneration will allow you to move through the battlefield and decimate huge groups of adds with continually proccing Scorch Grenades and Ignitions, rounding out with Apotheosis Veil, allowing you to continue your ability spam and build Transcendence at lightning speeds. Now that you know how to output some serious damage, there's a few exotic armor variants that you can swap Apotheosis Veil out for depending on your playstyle. Firstly, I have to mention the new exotic class item for Warlock that has the ability to combine both the ability regeneration of Apotheosis Veil as well as the increased super building and damage from Star Eaters. This combination will allow your Nova Bomb to hit even harder as well as provide more ability spam once you've cast that super. As I mentioned earlier, this is a highly potent combination, but you have an exceedingly low chance of actually acquiring this exact combination, so I didn't want it to be the focal point of this build. If you do get it to drop though, I would definitely use that one in a heartbeat. For Song of Flame, Verity's Brow or its class item equivalent works exceedingly well with the Wisp and will now benefit from Verity's increased grenade damage output and regeneration. Finally, Swarmers is actually a good substitution for those looking to replace Nova Bomb with Needlestorm, as it will allow your super to unravel the target on top of the Threadlink damage. If you don't care as much about being the top damage dealer on the mission scorecard, and instead you have more of an affinity for ad clear, then this next build is for you. Being able to efficiently clear ads is an essential role for any endgame activity, and when it's done well, it allows other players to focus completely on the mechanics that they're assigned to. So let's get you equipped to do your job so well that others will notice the environment is oddly quiet and everything is dead. Let's start things off with a build that's already been dubbed the Bubble Buddy Army by the community. After all, who needs to make friends when you can just spawn your own? The exotic armor piece we'll be focusing on is none other than Getaway Artist. These exotic gauntlets shine bright during the season of Plunder when Arc 3.0 was first introduced, as they allowed you to consume your grenade and then get a supercharged Arc Soul for 20 seconds. The difference between the standard Arc Soul that you can get from the Arc Soul aspect and the one acquired from Getaway Artist is actually pretty noticeable. Besides lasting longer, the Arc Soul also shoots more frequently and regenerates your grenade energy every time you hit an enemy. These gauntlets fell off a bit in popularity once the season of Plunder was over, as the Arc subclass wasn't quite as competitive in endgame content as its counterparts. And this basically remained the case until the release of Prismatic, where now they've been breathed a new life by uniquely allowing you to create your own personal army of buddies. First and foremost, let's talk about your super. Seeing as these builds are focused on ad clear, I would recommend Song of Flame for its mobility and damage output to large groups of targets. Once again, your jump, class ability, and melee are really up to you, but my recommendations remain the same from the previous build. My personal favorite is probably the Strand Arcane Needle, since it fills up that prismatic bar really fast. However, if you're more of a Titan at heart, you might enjoy Chain Lightning in the melee slot. You'll be up close and personal a lot of the time, as well as being constantly amplified, which will allow it to chain more, as you'll see shortly. In the grenade slot, your choice is made for you. You need the Storm Grenade, as it's the only arc grenade option that you'll need to consume with your getaway artist. Your aspects are where the fun really begins, as you'll need Hellion, which we talked about previously, and Bleak Watcher, which allows you to consume that grenade and convert it into a Stasis turret, which fires slowing projectiles at enemies. For your fragments, I would recommend Facet of Sacrifice, which grants you bonus Darkness Transcendence energy anytime you get ability kills while under the effects of a light subclass buff. This includes both Amplified and Radiant. Next, I'd equip Facet of Devotion, which will grant you bonus light transcendence energy when targets afflicted by darkness debuffs, including Slow and Freeze, are defeated. Facet of Hope will occupy our third slot for increased ability regeneration when you have an elemental buff of any kind. And finally, we'll be keeping the same fragments as before, being Facet of Courage, Protection, and Purpose. Moving over to our artifact, we have a few substitutions from our previous build that will really help you out with this new setup. Our first one is swapping Galvanic Armor for Void Hegemony, which will grant you additional damage resistance when you're amplified. The next one's in the last column, where we'll substitute Expanding Abyss for Transference that grants additional damage to our grenades and melees while Transcendent. Additionally, any weapon final blows while Transcendent will refund light and dark energy after your Transcendence ends. Your armor mods and weapons will look pretty similar to the previous build, with a focus on orb production to increase your survivability as well as ability regeneration. Okay, here's the real question. So how do I begin creating my little army of buddies? Well, in 2 button presses, you'll have 3 buddies to fight on your behalf. First up, you want to find the group of ads that you want to wipe out, and then use your class ability to spawn your solar buddy. Then just hold down your grenade button, which will consume it and create both the Arc Soul and Stasis turret. Once you've done these things, you're going to be ready to wreak havoc on the battlefield, since you'll immediately be amplified, which will grant you damage resistance, increased darkness energy gain, and a speed boost. Simultaneously, your Solar Buddy and Arc Soul will be shooting at targets that are already afflicted by the slow from your Stasis turret, which ramps up your Transcendence gain as well as your grenade and class ability. This cycle can rinse and repeat until the room is cleared and you're ready to take down a whole nother group. If you want even more friends, there's been a few clips circulating where people have actually been able to activate Child of the Old Gods, Threadlings, and the Time Loop Buddy from the Exotic Pulse Rival No Time to Explain. However, it seems that this requires you to be in Mayhem and does take a little bit more setup. And while the build to this extent isn't necessarily practical, having 7 different things orbiting around you is exceedingly funny or horrifying depending on which side you're on. If these previous builds have been a bit too much in one direction or the other, and you'd prefer more of a neutral game setup that's good at both ad clear and damage, well, I have an option for you too. The next 2 armor pieces take the base pieces of our previous builds and allow you to enjoy the feel of Prismatic without overcommitting to one way or another, and instead focus on the middle ground of both weapon damage and ability output. The first armor piece of this section is the time-honored Eye of Another World helmet. This will grant you a passive 50% speed increase to the regeneration of your melee, grenade, and class ability. Pairing this with the fragments Facet of Sacrifice, Hope, Courage, Protection, and Purpose will ensure a smooth flow between your super, transcendence, and your regular ability regeneration. The only artifact mod that I would recommend keeping on regardless of your build is Radiant Orbs, as it provides you a massive benefit just for picking up orbs. The rest of your artifact and armor mods will really boil down to however you want to play around that super, and if you want to be more passive or more aggressive. If you want to focus more on weapon play and damage, you might want to try out the Mantle of Battle Harmony chest piece. This armor piece will grant you additional super energy whenever you get kills with weapons that match your equipped super damage type, as well as granting them bonus damage once your super energy is full. I want to make a few honorable mentions for exotic combinations to try out for your neutral game. If you go with Spirit of Necrotic and Spirit of Syntheseps, you'll get increased melee damage that spreads poison, and if you go with Spirit of Inmost Light and Spirit of Verity, you can get increased ability regeneration and grenade damage. As we mentioned at the start, these builds really only scratch the surface of what's possible with Prismatic, and I know that we'll get even crazier builds going as people get their hands on more combinations of these class items, and other hidden synergies pop up with previously forgotten exotics. I'll also have a similar video like this up for Titan builds soon, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that one. And I'm really curious to hear from you in the comments about your favorite builds that you've tried for any of the 3 classes. Thanks for watching, and up next, check out my best Prismatic builds for Hunter. It's linked on screen and in the description.